it, sorry. But we've got KIRI here, so that's really cool. Appreciate everyone coming along. I hope you've all enjoyed the sausage and that tonight. If you haven't grabbed one, get out there and grab one. It's just about formal night, find out what Labour's about, what we're doing this year, who's the candidate, etc. So with that, I'll bring on KIRI.
Ko tahi me mea na kia koutou katoa I hui mai raru I te tuinui o tēnei kura. Kai a koe e te pāpā, e kiriuia o tō matupira o tō tātou nei hui I tēnei pō, ka nui te mihi kia koe. O tira kia koutou, ngā uri o te mana whenua o tēnei whenua, ngā uri o Ngāti Tūwharetoa, ngā uri o Ngāti Awa, I raro e te tuinui o tō koutou maina tapu o Pūtauaki, tahu tō koutou awa tapu o Rangitaiki, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Good evening everybody. My name's KIRI Allan and I'm Labour's East Coast candidate. And first of all, just really want to thank you guys for coming out. It's a Friday night. There's probably lots of things that you could be doing right now, like watching the league. The girls are about to kick off the Kiwis Anzac Test, 7 o'clock. They're pretty feisty, so I'll try to follow in their footsteps. For me, I've been on the campaign trail now since December. I was made our candidate, and we really started to get things running in about January. And I guess for me, why I put my name up to be a candidate for the Labour Party, and here in Arohe, a region that I'm really proud to be from, when I came back home, we came back a few years ago, and when I came back home, a couple of things. We didn't grow up with this thing called homelessness here. We didn't see it, didn't know it, hadn't heard of it. I think I remember the first time I met a homeless person was when I was about 13 years old, up on Kawerau in Auckland, and I had to ask my mum, I said, why are they on the street, mum? She said, oh, that's a homeless person. When we came back here, the amount of whānau that I have met, either up to 13, I've actually moved into a 3-bedroom home that's had up to 19 people living on that one site. The amount of families I've met living down the beach, in tents, in their cars. Just the other day, I met with a couple here. They're a couple, lived just down the road. They got a text from one of their friends, said, oh, come and see us, we're down at the beach. Thought she was going down for a picnic. And there was mum, dad, 3 kids in the car. They're living down there. I said, bro, come and stay with us. Of course they're too whakamai to reach out, too shy, too embarrassed. Nobody likes to admit that they're not quite making it. And anyway, they brought them into their home. And the dad, he had a job. He was working in the horticulture industry. Got about $500 a week. So, after tax. But here in Kawerau, it's always been a workers' town, an affordable town. Couldn't get a rental. $500. They had there were 5 kids, but there were no rentals on the market. Now the other day, you'll all know we had the floods of Edgecombe, and I just really want to acknowledge the work of this town, the stewardship of your council. You have been absolutely stellar. You've been the what I would say is the epitome of what I remember about growing up in small town. It was the community that mobilised. It was the community that got down to Rautahi. It was the community that opened up those gates, and it was the council that supported them. And it was really interesting because every time I go down there, I started going down there, I think about night 2 after they opened up. And the first thing that you notice, it wasn't the hand sanitizer that they gave you first, it was a hug. It didn't matter who you were, but they gave you a big hug and then a big feed, and people were looking after each other. They took me back to a moment in time in the 80s because that was the way I was brought up. People could mana aki, lift each other up when times got tough, and they did get tough, and we all remember the 80s. They got tough, particularly towards the end of that era. They got tough. But the difference between then and what I see now that there was a little bit more fat in the coffers. Now we start so far behind. So when there's a big housing crisis, it's not just a couple of people that are moving out of homes, it's actually we've got absolutely no homes. So where I was going with that is that the day before the Edgecombe floods, in Whakatane, in Kawerau, those are the two towns I had a look at, there were like 3 or 4 rentals in the whole area. So when you get 1,600 people displaced overnight, and what are we going to do for the next, I think there's about 260 people out of their homes at the moment. It's our towns, but we don't have that fat and the kind of belch that we kind of had back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, so when my dad, he got laid off at Rangiuru at the meatworks in Avco, just at Te Puke over there. So when they got laid off, and everyone kind of got laid off at the same time, the community responded. My dad went and worked on some farms. I started carving, started trailing, calves all around the east coast actually. Went and based ourselves up in Tikaraka there. But when people are getting laid off now, and you would know, you guys will all know, since we've been home, the amount of layoff parties I've been to for lads from Kawerau, it's been really sad, eh? My father-in-law, these fellas' uncle, her dad, he's been at the mill for 31 years, Tasman. Now OG, yeah. And it was about a month ago, I think. We went there to a layoff party, and that layoff had been 2 years in the making. So at the end of this kind of time, and there'd sort of been lots of trepidation for these whānau because they didn't know if they're going to have jobs at the end of it. Anyway, as it turned out, not many people had jobs at the end of it, but it took 2 years to find that out. Anyway, when we went to the farewell party, young men just starting their apprenticeships, middle-aged men with kids, 3, 4, 5 kids, and then my father-in-law, who's he's only 60. Still got a lot of life in him to work. But anyway, so that's what's happening here. And so when we look at towns like Kawerau, always been worker towns. I think at heyday, 2,500 people down at the mill. We're down to 400 at the moment, split. I was with Aaron at the mill the other day. I think they've got 170 on site, and he knows that number's going to be smaller and smaller. They're holding on for dear life, but the reality is regions like ours, regions like Kawerau, go for a drive down Whakatane, shops closing down there. Go up to Apōtiki, shops closing down there. Go up to Gizi, shops closing up there. And all throughout this region, we're crying out for some pretty basic things. Houses, jobs, and the big other thing that I'm getting from all of our kuia and kaumātua, particularly our elderly people that are coming through, healthcare. They're not getting access to their blooming doctors. The costs of their GPs are rising at a rapid rate. I was with a group the other day. They were running a national action, the Yes We Care action. And what it was quite a vivid memory or a depiction, because you had just behind me hundreds of these white stand-up characters, and what they were the cutout of the people that weren't there. The health system is $1.8 billion currently underfunded. So New Zealand, when I grew up, it used to be this kind of utopian country, I went through public schools. We all went through public schools. We got a pretty good education. Now, the schools have been standardised. They've adopted national standards, a corporate model, and look, there's people here in the room that are in there, we're in the school, so I won't harp on about it too much. But the feedback I'm getting from teachers all throughout my area and nationally, they're saying we've transitioned to a corporate model that's requiring really to get these set deliverables for our kids, so we're teaching them to answer questions on the test instead of teaching our kids how to think, instead of teaching our kids how to engage. And it's all contingent on funding. Now, it's an interesting thing. So for me, I'm watching in our education system, I'm watching us going from boasting about being the world-class education system to the rest of the world. We were We had a world-class housing system. We were the first nation to implement a full social welfare system for people that were struggling to get by. Now, if you're on the social welfare system, you're lining up, showing your ID. You're going into the office, it's like, going past the security guards, showing them your ID, sitting down, they're telling you that, well, haven't you done this? Haven't you done this? Haven't you done this? And look, it's not the fault of the people that are working there. That's what they have been required to do by their employers. It's not the workers' fault. It's the system's fault. The system's bloody broken. So for me, when we came back a few years ago, I said, well, stuff this. If my mates can't come home, if our whānau can't get jobs here, we're in one of the most beautiful regions in the country, and our families are struggling, well, something's got to change. And it was old Norm Kirk. Many of you remember old Norm, big Norm. He said it's a pretty simple equation. Everybody needs somebody to love, somebody to live, something for somebody to work, and something to hope for. And when I think about when I looked at where did I want to kind of put my hand up and try and affect change and try and do something, for me, our party, the Labour Party, has had a 100-year history of working for people, working for the little guy. Have we got it right all the time? Hell no. We're stuffed up miserably. We're a 100-year-old party. But where I feel like we're at right now, we've gone through the globalisation era of the 80s, yeah? And we remember the fourth Labour government. The fifth Labour government under ALLAN, it was kind of a recoup. Still trying to work out. Our party was trying to work out, where do we actually stand? What are we? We're trying to still find our feet between this globalised world and communities. And it was, we were working there, we were getting there. Now, 9 years under National, I think what I feel like is happening in the Labour Party right now, to me it feels like we've gone right back to our roots. It's gone, actually we can't really kind of question who we are or what our identity is. It's our workers, it's our people, and right now there's far too many people that are suffering under the hands of this government. So for me, that's why I put my hand up. Locally as well, there's little things that we could be doing, and we could be doing a lot better. We're talking about jobs, and we're talking about our natural resources, and I don't know about you guys, but I grew up swimming in the rivers around actually just over Paingoroa, we're in the Kaituna. But our rivers were pristine. We could get seafood from our estuaries without it being an issue. Right now, our estuaries, I met with Alison Dews this week. She's one of the scientists that's been working with the families up on Waiotahi. You see all those bums, at the pipi beds as you're driving up to Portuguese, doing the Māori shuffle, and you see that all the time. It's what you used to see. But right now, for the first time, we've had she was doing her testing privately because she was so concerned. She thought that there might have been some issues with the kaimoana, with the seafood, but didn't really know. When they got the testing done, that seafood there is testing for extremely high levels of E. coli. That whole Waiotahi catchment, or that estuary where you see the shimmies going on, that's been a traditional harvesting bed for many, many years. For whānau, for hapu, for many years. She said to me, Waiotahi is just the cusp. She told me that whole east coast, which has been where it is intensively, where the land is intensively used for particular types of purposes, primarily ag, it's peat soil. You've got pathogens. There's all boring stuff, but you've got pathogens seeping in. It's impacting our food, and that food's not going to be able to rejuvenate. That's the first thing. Second thing, you've had a government come out recently saying, well, rivers that are polluted, they're all right. They're okay, as long as they're wadeable. As long as we can wade in them, it's all right. I don't know about you fellas, but I reckon these kids, they learn to swim. If you learn to swim, you learn to bowl in the rivers. And that's something that is part of our international identity on the world stage. We are clean, green, Aotearoa. But right now, that image and our rivers and our seafood is all at threat. And why? Because we've had a government for the past 9 years who knew that this was an absolute crises in waiting, like they knew with the housing, but have failed to do anything about it. It's like, see no evil, hear no evil, you know, they're that little monkey. That's what's gone on for the past 9 years. This stuff's been preventable. With the water, we need to do a whole heap of work, and the solutions are all sitting there. It's about us having to justly transition to better land uses. It's not rocket science, but we can't have parts of our rural community being exposed and kind of being bombed on at the expense of everybody else. But what happens is that we get this war. National kind of participates in this war between the farmers and the greenies, and we say that there can be no intermediary. That's a crock. We have to be able to be putting forward strong solutions, because our economies here, our rural economies here, depend on our ability to use that land. These guys over here, right now, entering into some, like all up the coast, right? There is a transition between some of our land use into horticulture. And that's actually pretty good for our environment, and it's good for our pockets economically. But there's been a real hesitancy by this government to do anything because it doesn't want to upset its voters. Well, for me, that's not good enough. Like, our country deserves long-term thinking, long-term planning. Superannuation, it won't affect many of us, but for me, it's a pretty big old deal. You know, we've got an ageing population, and that's just the reality, the way things are. When Sir Michael Cullen was Minister of Finance, he introduced the Cullen Fund. It was a mandatory fund, every year, compulsory contributions. First term in national government, they axed that funding. Right now, another crisis, a preventable crisis, and we're going to have to find how we're going to fund an ageing population without having cash in bank. To me, I don't think that being in Parliament's all that sexy, and I don't think that the role of government is to be sexy. I think it's to be pragmatic. I think it's to be forward-looking. I think it needs to think longer than 3 years away, because right now, these decisions that have been made on popularity polling, which is how the national government, they're frank about it. They have governed by popularity in the polls. That is not good governance. So for me, everywhere I go, I'm seeing families. Not everybody's hard off. But people that, for example, take my campaign team. I've got quite a few people with quite a few bucks in their pocket. They're not in this game to change the government because they're going to benefit somehow. They're in the game to change the government because we genuinely want New Zealand to be that country that prioritised our people again. We started it in the 30s. And where have we gone? And when I meet with my family, I'm one of 10 kids. I'm the 9th of 10. All my sisters are solo mums. And we sit down and we do the numbers. If you're a single mum trying to look after your kids, at best, on your best week, and this is on the weeks where you make no oopsie-daisy decisions, you might have $20 cash left in your back pocket if you've done a really good job of budgeting. My brothers, good lads, strong lads. But they were all engaged by the criminal justice process by the age of 16. You know, where I get to at this point in time, I look at the potential of our young people and go, are we as a country fostering the best you? Because I want to be a part of a country that's fostering the best you. Because I think the way that we're going to thrive in the global economy is when we foster the best us. And right now, we're a small country trying to play on the world stage. We're about to spend $50 million in a little expose in Dubai, selling brand New Zealand country. At the same time, we've got kids going without food everywhere. You talk to any teacher everywhere, their job's not to be a teacher anymore, it's to be a teacher and a social worker. It's endemic throughout our society. So for me, I'm putting my hand up for our party because we fundamentally need change. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. questions, we're here. We've still got some sausages over there, and my MC's over there. I think he's supposed to be MCing. Yeah. But yeah, look, is there any questions? I mean, there's a lot on people's minds. Hey.
How do you feel about being in cooperation with the Greens? How do you feel about the Green Party and the policy?
Yeah, for me, MMP, the political system that or the electoral system and environment that we're in now, it requires every single party to collaborate with partners. And I guess the whole point of MMP is trying to find that low-hanging common ground where we can actually try and make change. And between us and the Greens, there is some common ground. Whether it's going to be the Greens, whether it's New Zealand First, whether it's the Māori Party, whomever. But for us, I think, look, we're pretty upfront about what our core priorities are. It's really focusing on our families again. It's getting our families into houses, jobs, schools, and fixing our healthcare system. So we're transparent about that with all the parties that we're engaging with. The Greens have been upfront about what they are about. For them, their fundamental priority is environment, and for us, we can see there's a lot of crossover because, healthy people, healthy environment, we say go ahead and hand.
So how would you deal with, marrying what the one that we've got intensive dairy farming, which the Greens are saying isn't really good for the environment, but so we want dairy farming.
Yeah.
But we also want something that's good for the environment. And like you said, we don't want to scare up the farmers and put the farmers down. So how would Labor deal with that situation?
Yeah, good question. Look, just yesterday, Jacinda and I were having a discussion just about this because for me, I said, look, I can't be part of a party that's coming out on a rampage against my farmers. That's what my whole electorate's comprised of. I was born and raised bloody on farms and, warming our feet in the cow paddies and whatnot. It's such a big part of our rural economy. But I said, so for me, I can't stand this kind of discussion that it's the farmers or the water. Every single farmer that I know, hard-working, pragmatic, and will make good bloody decisions. They want the water to be fresh and pristine as much as anybody else. So what it is then is not about creating this dichotomy between A and B, it's about us going, okay, let's cut the crap. What is it that we can focus on? What's the low-hanging denominator? And for me, I talked a little bit about just transition. I think that if we are saying, okay, we need to transition out of agricultural intensive dairying in this proportion of the land because it's just not working anymore, then we need to be really intentional about what that's going to do to the farmers and then I guess the overall benefits to the region. So we've got some thinking, it hasn't come out yet, but that's something that I think we can be pretty pragmatic about and find solutions. And that's one of the things I love about New Zealand. We're not an old nation. We all came here, we worked hard, and in rural regions like ours, not like the city folk, but we're used to change. Nothing's so entrenched that we can't change it if it's actually going to be for the best outcomes for our nation. And so I've got a lot of trust in our rural communities that if we have to change, we'll change and we'll do it okay. But we need to show leadership to assist families and communities.
Do you know if there are any plans in place or any ideas out there or how to deal with moments when we have way too much water and moments when we don't have much water?
Yeah.
It just seems to me there's not really any water tanks around. I don't know.
Water catching systems.
I don't know. As opposed to putting whole tanks.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, we all know what happened down there with that. Yeah.
It seems to me like, in those sort of situations where there's
Look, I'm no scientist. I don't quite know the infrastructural kind of arrangements, what needs to be done. I do know though that there has been for about the last, since about 2008, when the LORF started, so that's the Land and Water Forum. And look, I'll give credit where credit's due. I think that forum, it's been a cross-collaborative forum by stakeholders, community, greenies, everybody in the mix, going, okay, this is what we need to do in terms of our future waterways. They've produced 3 reports so far that address things like water captures and so on and so forth, how we transition to, X, Y, Z. And that was an initiative that came out of National. Where National went wrong though is that they didn't pick up the recommendations of law. So after all this fantastic work was done, so I think that for us is something, it's areas that we can really work with. And so with these things I put about like the trust transitions, you know, they come from stakeholders who know a lot more about this stuff than I do. Kia ora, mate.
Yeah, it's interesting to note the youngest boy attached himself to a cowhockey's daughter. And talking to his father-in-law, he's been amazed with the downturn in income. He reduced his herd, started with the beef.
Yep.
He's gone on to milking once a day.
Yep.
His lifestyle is easier. His cows are bringing in more milk.
Yep.
He says, why didn't I do this 30 years ago? So he, along with a lot of other farmer, he's reduced his fertiliser input, whole farm input. So this is the important thing to look at, is that farmers, you get away from the corporate farms and get back to why aren't we producing more milk powder?
Yeah. Look.
Baby food, you know.
Yeah.
And that's giving a higher return to the coffee off the same product.
Yeah, look, the agricultural industry is pretty complex, and look, and intensive dairy does suit some catchments. I'm definitely probably no extreme greenie when it comes to that. I think that there is areas where intensive dairy works. Where it doesn't, though, it really depends on a whole range of factors, which I won't go into tonight. But one of the big issues is where we're farming on peat soil. Peat soil is no good for intensified farming because it just seeps right through all the pathogens, nutrients, and nitrates, and so on and so forth. So they just go straight into the estuaries. So look, so some just soil. Look, everybody picked up dairying because it was our white gold. That's what we've done in all of our rural tracks. So we all adopted. Now our science got any better. Now it can tell us that this area is good, this one not so good. And for us up the east coast, not so good. What that means though, there's some other ways of mitigating kind of impacts from dairy and those areas that it doesn't suit so far. Less intensified, better on-farm practice, a lot more investment on farm to water purification, the ponds and so on and so forth. There are measures to mitigate. But what we are really needing to address is kind of the large-scale corporate farming and whether that's an appropriate fit for us as our nation moves forward. And it may be that it is. It may be that we don't really need to worry about the clean green kind of image, and we'll focus on this white gold kind of future. But that's not really the feeling that I'm getting. It's not the economic business cases that I'm seeing coming through. And so therefore, if that's no longer our future, our predominant future, then we need to be looking at what really is. And there are options out there, but they're a matter of working through.
You were talking about getting our young people working. One of the things for me, and it's been quite interesting living here, they having a lot to do with the Cambridge community as well through Kawerau. Talking to the people over here, similar situation, I've got all the young people, no work for it.
Yeah.
Now you're talking over here, quite an affluent society. Similar situation.
Yep.
One of the things for me is we've got problems with building, electricians, the trades, needing skilled work.
Yep.
Okay, there's always this thing, but I can't pay them because they're
Health and safety.
health and safety, all the dope smokers and they we don't, right? But the thing for me is, what are we doing and what is the Labour Party going to do to make it possible for businesses to get good apprenticeships going? Because at the moment, the cost to an employer to run a good apprenticeship is huge. And so most of them, let's face it, most employers that would go down that path are usually 20 or less employees. They can't afford that cost, but they'd like to take workers on because it's the right thing to do.
Good question, mate. And so, classic, right now we're in a bereft kind of stage where we've got no new Sparkies to come through, no new Chippies, no new, So, and again, got to bring it back to the actions of this current government. They slashed all the trade training allowances and the schools, right? So, something that we've been working on under the leadership of Grant Robertson, it was the Future of Work program. So what he'd done a 2-year inquiry and going, okay, what kind of work will we need to, what kind of work are the predicted flows? What are we going to need to prepare for next 10, 20, 30 odd years? Trades, massive. So we've developed a trade training scheme that's part of our Future of Work program. Labor's got a package that is about getting younger people back into the trades. These aren't new policies, they're just going back to what worked before and re-implementing them. We've also, big part for us is realising that actually when kids finish high school, like myself and like others here, we got whacked with pretty big debts when we went straight into university, which the generation before us didn't. So you kind of start life on a bit of a back foot in that financial way. So the next thing that we said, well, okay, it doesn't matter what it is you want to study, whether it's in the trades, whether it's in whatever. So 3 years free education post-secondary school. And that is great in my view because it goes beyond just university education, just tailoring to that lot, like myself. It's broadening the scope and saying actually all you kids who weren't necessarily bookworms, we want to get your work ready. And so 3 years you can knock off most of your trading ticketing through somebody like Union Tech or wherever, you know. So I think that's another pretty big incentive, and it means that private business doesn't have to absorb the cost or the risk of having our kids on site. Third, that's sort of veering away. But another part of our policy there is really investing in younger ones in terms of doing innovation and social entrepreneurship. Sounds like sort of silly and fancy words, but for kids up this coast, for example, if you don't want to move away and you can come up with a project of let's pretend we're in Hawaii, and you might want to run a bloody horse riding tourism venture up the bush and down and take people out fishing for crayfish or whatever. So whatever your new idea is, so every year we're investing in, I think there's a couple of hundred kids per year that we are picking and investing in to get these kind of localised social businesses, innovative businesses, because what we're seeing is that really it's the people on the ground that know what the solutions are for each of the regions. It's not going to come from Wellington, it's not going to come from Auckland, it's going to come from the people here. And so our job then is to wrap around the doers. And so that's what we've said, is that we're going to invest in the young ones that want to actually create jobs and create business in towns like ours.
Looking at the other end of the scale, KIRI, and showing my age, it's an increasing factor because there's more and more of means around it still contributing to the workforce. And I was talking to Kim Campbell, the EMA, a while ago, and they've got a task force on how older workers with skills can still be involved, whether it's part-time or full-time in the workforce. And I think this is something that is really apolitical and needs to be recognised and more encouragement or recognition given to the older workers.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Dave. I referenced my father-in-law just a few weeks ago having to hang up his boots at 60, and he's fit. He's far fitter than me. I know it. He zoomed past me on his bike the other day. Oh, shame. But very competent and could work for quite a long time. So we definitely know it's a gap. I know that Grant's been doing a lot of thinking in this area. I'll have to come back on the actual particulars. But I do know that this is a crucial area for us because we've got, like you said, an ageing population and a population that wants to continue to work. And people don't want to hang up their boots at 65 as well. They want to work right through, and we see that everywhere.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I think a few years ago, we used to have night classes. And
They all got cut. Yep.
And for people around my age,
Yep.
they're too young to be
Yep.
elders and too old to be young.
Yep.
So, but there's stuff here for the young people, and sometimes we compare it to the senior places like that, and daycare stuff, which is great. But there are other things that we can't, because we see these being volunteers for those sort of organisations. But there's like, there's like this big gap that's been left because we haven't got the night classes there, and it was filling in where we could encouraged to go off to university and things like that. And, I'm just wondering if that could be put back on.
Oh, It was a huge big blight, and I know that there's my colleagues, they jumped up and down and a ferocious kind of roar. I know it's definitely something that they're working through the detail and trying to make the cost case again, because we recognise that a lot of people can't just up and go off to Wellington or Auckland to go get their studies. They want to do it home, and those courses are primarily in the evenings while you've got families and work and otherwise. So I know that's definitely, it is something that's been worked through in terms of the detail.
There's also a social side to it, which that, there's also going into the colleges, and we will see kids in, satellite and
Yep.
and so there's the interaction there, and
Yeah.
so that interaction got taken away as well.
Don't worry, we'll recruit you into the lab party and get you interact locked up.
Should Labour be successful, who's going to be the Minister of Mining Affairs? Considering Te Whanahapanui, for me it's important our foreshore and owns 97% of their foreshore. And with this new bill that's coming in, it's confusing people. Where does Labour see that? And who is that one that might get that tick on the box?
Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. It won't be me, and I promise you that. It will definitely be an issue for a lot of consideration. I will say that the lawyer for Te Whanahapanui is over there. Put your Macca case in. Talk to her. But look, so you know Macca, and the bill that's just gone through. We've just had the applications close off 2 weeks ago. So look, there's a whole range of, in our view, a whole range of issues with that. One, you're getting customary kind of titles to whenua or the takutai. Instead of going to the Mud Land Court and working through a process with people that are experts in that area, going straight to the High Court. There's 350, I think, applications that were sitting there last time I checked anyway. That's going to take years. It's going to be a horrible process, and I think it's absolutely egregious what's going to occur. We sat back. Actually, Natalie and I gave a presentation to the Supreme Court judge and a whole range of other judges about a month or two ago, and we said, hate to say this, guys, but watch out. You're getting these horrible cases that are about to land on the table, and they're not going to be nice. They're going to the wrong place. So look, we're probably, I don't know what the official word on this is, but my expectation is that we're not going to change that because everybody's right in the throes of going through the process. What I would be hoping is that we're going to work out how we're going to mitigate the fallout, because there is going to be some. Hey.
I saw last night on television about Otaki water
Yep.
plant.
Yeah.
And all the trucks that are coming down the road.
Yep.
The life, it's just over there.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, so I spoke to quite a few people yesterday. A couple of things, eh? So the Protect Our Water petition, one of the largest that's ever landed up in Parliament apparently, according to Trevor Mallard, and he's a historian. You know, he's been here 33 years, so he should know this stuff. So it's one of the this is an issue that's hitting home, and it's hitting home hard. What's the pity? Right there, on the back of our doorstep, we've got wholesale water, 700,000 litres
A minute.
per day.
A minute.
Well, not per, it's per day, I think 700,000 litres per day. And, you know, it's just, so our issue, my personal issue, one, you've got, it's a product that isn't changed, you know. So if you've got to do something to get value out of it. But right now they're not doing anything except capturing it. And we're caught in a quandary, and we're stuck with a government that's been too afraid to make any real decisive action. And when it comes to fresh water, it comes to the cleanliness of our fresh waterways, and it also comes to when we're talking about costs in water. What Stuart Nash has said, and I think this is our party policy, he's leading the charge on this. But what he said is that in the very first instance, what we need to be doing is putting a tax on just raw extraction of water. He uses an example of how over in Fiji, there was a Canadian company, you know, Fiji Water? Yeah, so they were paying pretty much nothing for a really long time. They hiked it up the cost to, I think they put a 20 cent tax per head. That's too high for here, but they put a 20 cent tax on it. It changed their economy overnight. There's a big tussle. Canada said that they were out, they're walking out, they weren't going to touch it, but they didn't. They stayed, and it really transformed the economy of Fiji. We're talking different scales here, but that's something that he's been quite passionate about, and he is the spokesperson for economic development. He's saying, well, we don't transform the asset, which is water, then there needs to be a direct cost. And I think what we've also been discussing, and this is still a discussion point, but with that revenue, because it's coming from a local resource, if that revenue goes directly into regional councils, so they can actually be quite locally solution-based. You need infrastructure here, you've got Mafutare about here, that whole community over there's been heave-hoed out of their town, you've got each give heave-hoed. So we're quite, look, I'll talk about it from my own personal perspective. I think there is a real need, and there is a kind of in my mind, a little bit of a natural marriage, but where we sort of end on the details, that's something I'd quite like to see though. Revenue from those raw, extractive industries coming directly to regions.
And also sort of things like, it's a plant in the middle of it. It's untouchable, and it's the land around it, it's making all the money, but everyone else is suffering because they're lifestyle.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's really well run. I also just want to commend the work of those that have been involved in that campaign. You've had an absolute national ripple, and my phone was ringing all morning from journalists all over the country. Who do you guys know about the KIRI? Yeah, there you go. And so it's having an impact, it's having a national impact, and you've done a really good job.
See, my question about that is, okay, so we at the moment don't charge per se.
Yep.
So how do companies like KIRI, over in France and ones like that, how do they go on about that? To put that charge, I know with KIRI you get a little bit of a, because they do change it because they can't make it.
Yes.
So, those sorts of, has there been any thought to sort of do it, get a group together to go out and have a look around the world and see, because we've got to be we're not the only country where this water's being exported from.
Yeah. Good question. That's something I'm going to ask my colleagues. I'm a newbie, so I don't know all the answers. They've probably been around the world 3 times. I don't know. But I think it's a really good thing. We've got to be learning from the way that other communities have interacted or interfaced and found solutions to these same issues that we're facing here. But from my little skim out around the world, what I do see is that most people charge people to extract resources. we're a bit naked pants in that way, in my view. Same with home ownership. Anyway, I won't get into that. Any other questions, or is it cup of tea time?
And another sausage.
Bud Light? Yeah, sure.
Will we be seeing any more of you and any more of your colleagues over the
Pigs.
next? And can we have more of a notice in May, because I just found out about May.
Yeah, nice videos. Jump on my Facebook, KIRI ALLAN East Coast, and I chuck everything up usually on that. But also my colleague Neil, Brian, Diane, and all the team here, get in touch, and you'll get in touch with them, and make sure that you guys are all good.
This is here on the first day, on the third week of that month. We have our branch meeting. Not here, just in the room.
At the staff room.
In the staff room, yeah. Just in the staff room. Here and third Thursday.
One thing I will say, what we really need, so the big thing with us, with the Labour Party, one, I sort of say that we're foot soldier warriors. We're never going to raise as much cash as National, we're pretty frank about that. But when we do get our